Well, a big hello to everyone, and welcome to another fun episode of Hereticals History. This one we are going to be going into. This is going to be the first of what could end up being a fairly long series on the Bronze Age collapse, which is one of the most interesting times in history. So, my name's Chris. So, for those who don't know me, I'm a historian or have a background in history. So I'll be approaching things from the academic point of view. And joining me, as always, is my co-host and good buddy, Dan. How you doing, Dan?
Hey, Chris. How you going?
Going all right, mate. Now, it's funny. Before we went live, I was complaining that Dan had a crackle in his microphone. Turns out it's actually my headphones. And I just learnt that as the intro music was playing. So that's a pretty good trick.
The main thing is it's working now that we're live. And
well, no, you're still crackly, but that's a me issue and not an everyone else issue.
Well, that's all right then. And so, whilst Chris is the professional historian, I am the layman, so to speak. I am a lover of history and have always had a passion for history. But yes, I have not gone down the academic route. So,
mind you, what I will say is you and I have had a lot of conversations. Now, I've had conversations with people who have done history degrees, and I can tell you wipe the floor with most of them.
Yeah.
Some of the finer points of, like historical methodology, obviously you haven't gotten to that. You haven't studied that. But when it actually comes to the history side of things, mate, you hold your own with the best of them. Trust me.
Yes.
You're fine. There's some really, I don't want to say dumb people that get history degrees because that wouldn't be a fair statement, but there's some people who get history degrees who I think go by the motto of P's get degrees. And Dan, I think
academically deficient.
Yeah, so I think Dan, don't downplay yourself because I'm actually probably jealous. You've probably got more history books than I do.
Yeah.
Which is something that I'm working on. I'll slowly get there. But in the meantime, mate, this should be a good chat. So the Bronze Age collapse is a really, really interesting topic because it's probably one of the unsolved mysteries of history. And it's, even though we're going back to 1177 BC, it's in the relative schemes of things, it's not from a time that's so far away we know nothing about it. In fact, quite the opposite. We know so much about this period of time. We don't have a definitive answer for what happened, why all these great civilizations suddenly collapsed. So it's something that
there was multiple civilizations too. It wasn't like the Roman Empire, which has similar parallels to the Bronze Age collapse, but it was one empire. Where we're talking about 5 or 6 huge civilizations that were dominant in world trade and all collapsed at similar times.
And these aren't civilizations that no one's heard of. I mean, we're talking about groups like the Mycenaeans, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Assyrians. So these are all some pretty big and pretty well-known empires. So it's definitely going to be interesting. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a bit of an overview. So I guess this is going to be the short version of what is the Bronze Age collapse. And then as we go on, we're going to dive into the topic in a lot more depth. We want to do very much a deep dive into it. We're going to look at some of the civilizations. We're going to look at the world of the Bronze Age collapse, the different civilizations, the different groups that were around, some of the different theories as to what happened. But I think for those who maybe aren't familiar with the Bronze Age collapse, Dan, what is the Bronze Age collapse? What's your understanding? Because I can give the big, boring academic historical explanation. Give us the everyman. Give us the historical pundits version of what the Bronze Age collapse is. Well,
I've been watching a few videos on Eric Klein is a brilliant archaeologist, and he spent 30 years in the field, and this is his specialty. But he was talking.
Incidentally, we've throughout this series, I can probably guarantee we're going to steal a lot from Eric Klein.
Yes. Yes.
Look, Eric Klein is the go-to man. So Dr. Eric Klein, lots of love and respect to you.
And he's written a book too, which
was written
if you
2
get
books.
a chance to read it, it's called 1177, The Year That Civilization Collapsed. Is that the title? Have I got that title right? Yeah,
that's right. And I might post an Amazon link down below for anyone who wants to buy the book.
If you're interested in this time period, definitely grab this book. It's just fascinating. But I guess my understanding is, so the Bronze Age was a time when they had Bronze Age materials and tools and weapons. So it went from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age. And the bronze tools were not... So the materials for them weren't exactly all in one place. So this is why we have these 5 or 6 big civilizations doing huge amounts of trade. And Eric Klein even mentioned it in his video, where it was kind of a globalized society for that time period, because you've got all these nations trading and fighting with each other, and they're building all these incredible weapons and technology. And you've got the Babylonians as well, who have created, probably a couple of thousand years earlier, they've created the first writing form in cuneiform, which I'm sure we'll get into one day. And
actually, I don't think it's the Babylonians who had the first form of writing, but
Akkadians.
I'm happy to be corrected on that.
The Akkadians. It's the Akkadians.
See, Dan, come on, man. I've just given you this massive rap and said that you know more than people who are. Mate, you've let me down. We're 6 minutes in. You've let me down, mate.
The Akkadians and Sumerians are from the same region, which then eventually formed the Babylonian Empire. And
technicality.
Could be wrong on that. That's a very simplistic view, and it's not. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, I'm getting off topic.
So I guess to look at, and I guess to touch a little bit on what you were saying. So the Bronze Age was named the Bronze Age because it's the period that bronze started being developed in weapons, machinery, tools, and a number of things. Now, bronze is an alloy, so it's a combination of mainly copper with a little bit of tin. Now, copper was plentiful and is reasonably plentiful. Tin, not so much. So tin is where a lot of the trading came into it. And because of that need for the tin, it put a lot of different empires, civilizations, and groups in touch with each other. Now, the 2 biggest tin mines, roughly in that region in that period, was in Afghanistan. And when I say this is modern day Afghanistan and modern day England, in Cornwall, that's where your biggest 2 tin mines are. Now, I believe there was some tin in Sicily, so there was a little bit of trade there, but that's where the Bronze Age gets its name. So ironically, I think it's fair to say, and tell me if you agree with me on this, Dan, I think the civilizations that we're going to be talking about around, I guess, this Mediterranean basin, sort of what's modern day Greece, Turkey, Israel, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, all that area. I would say it was probably the most civilized region in the world at that time. And when I say civilized, I guess it's the precursor to Western civilization. So you've got groups like, say, the Mycenaeans, who are the precursors to the Greeks. When you think of Mycenaeans, think about Agamemnon, who led the siege against Troy, places like that. You've got the Assyrians, which are sort of modern day Syria, and then sort of moving up a bit north into a lot of what is Anatolia, modern day Turkey. Crete was a big player in this period as well. So the Cretans, they were sort of a big island power right in the middle of the Mediterranean. So there's a lot of power there. The Babylonians, centered around, well, Babylon is just south of Baghdad and what is modern day Iraq. And then Egypt, if you don't know where Egypt is, well, I don't know what to tell you.
And
Egypt's a big player.
Sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Go for it.
And I think Babylon also flourished because they had 2 major rivers that sat either side of their main city, so the Tigris and the Euphrates, which was, and then I think from there was also that huge trade route from there all the way to the Mediterranean coast as well.
Yeah, well, where the Babylonians definitely had a lot of power was that tin trade out of Afghanistan virtually went right through regions that they controlled. So, so it did make them a fairly major sort of player in a lot of this stuff. So, I'll just see if I can bring up I'm just going to bring up a map of the area now. So, just to show everyone
as well, the civilizations at the time. So, what were considered big cities was probably only a population of 10,000, but back in that time, that was considered to be a huge city. So, which, small country towns these days are 10,000 people. So it's hard to imagine that the capitals of the world were only about 10,000 people at the time.
All right. So what you can see here is we're pretty much dealing with this area here. If you can see me doing and down to here, actually, I might just zoom out a bit. So modern day Greece, that's where you've got Mycenaeans. Cyprus is a big player. You've got Crete there, who is also a big player. You have your Assyrians in here. Egypt. Now, Egypt is mainly centered around here in this period and sort of moving up into the southern tip of what is modern day Israel. So, I guess, Gaza. Gaza's traditionally been Egyptian. And then Baghdad right here. If we were to zoom down into Baghdad, just south of Baghdad here is where the ruins of Babylon are. So hopefully that gives everyone a little bit of perspective about the region that we're talking when we're talking about the Bronze Age collapse.
And then obviously Afghanistan was further east.
Yeah, so now I guess we haven't really spoken about the Bronze Age collapse here. What we have spoken about is a little bit about the Bronze Age. So I guess why this period was revolutionary was because bronze is far stronger and more durable than stone, that it obviously from the Stone Age, or copper, just as itself. So it allowed societies to sort of advance pretty dramatically, sort of building stronger tools for farming, for crafting, and for warfare, of course. I think the original ones who mastered bronze is actually the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. So it goes back a fair way. So this sort of started around about 3300 BC, and then went up to the period that we're about to talk about in the Bronze Age collapse. So let's talk about the collapse itself. So what is the collapse? What happened?
And just of a quick fun fact as well, Chris, before we do. So Akkadian, which is part of the Babylonian area, that was the trade writing on all the cuneiform tablets and all the tablets around the Mediterranean and all that. So basically, Akkadian was the English of the day. So today,
it was very much the lingua franca of the period. So
just a fun fact that the Akkadian language was the language of trade of the day. But right, let's go to the collapse. So I guess
tell us about the collapse, Dan.
The big two words that you will hear with regards to the collapse of this Bronze Age collapse, whether they caused it or whether they were just part of circumstance, the two words are sea peoples. So now, do you want to talk about the sea peoples, Chris? Oh,
before we go into the sea people, which we will, I'm curious to know, before we actually start on this journey, because look, a lot of the research we're going to be doing on this, we're going to be doing as we go. So I'm curious to know, Dan, what do you think, before we start this, before we really dig into it, what do you think caused the Bronze Age collapse?
I think I see a lot of parallels with the Roman Empire, and I know it's mentioned a lot as well. So you have with the Bronze Age collapse, you have a major area with 5 or 6 major empires, and over the period of about 100 years, they all either diminish or go extinct, and I think Egypt is the only real survivor, but their empire is severely diminished from this. And I've seen a lot of things that drought had a big. Drought was one thing that initially pushed people to migrate, and obviously there's wars and all those type of things. And it's interesting because whenever a huge empire of nations collapse, it's catastrophic because you don't just lose those nations, but you lose the trade, you lose the levels of mathematics and tool making and all those type of things, and the literacy. So literacy back in the ancient times was probably 2% for people to be able to read and write. But if you lose that 2%, then your writing is gone, and a lot of other things go with it. So and that's why you go into those dark ages. And obviously from this, we've heard that there's a 400 period of not much history happening. So, and I think
that's the interesting thing. So essentially what happens is, and I'm just going to come out and say, I think it was the sea people. I'm going to blame the sea people.
Okay.
I've got some theories on the sea people, but
Interesting.
I think the sea people is the main cause. Essentially what happens is everything's going all grand and swimmingly in Bronze Age Mediterranean basin. Then all of a sudden one day, bang, history ends. All written records end. The only clues we have is a letter saying the sea people are coming, which is an oversimplified version of what it is. But for the next 400 years, these civilizations, nothing really happens with them. The only ones that somewhat survive is Egypt. The Mycenaeans are gone. By the time history, or we can see something's happened, the Greeks are there.
Yeah.
So a lot of the information of that period is lost, with a few little clues here and there. But even if you go and have a look at something that actually struck me was I went to an exhibit on ancient Egypt, and they've got all these grand sarcophaguses from the period before the Bronze Age collapse, and certainly the period well after the Bronze Age collapse up to the Roman times. But then there was this one coffin from around about, or one sarcophagus from around about 1100 BC. And what struck me about it was it wasn't this grand metal looking bright sarcophagus. It was a very plain wooden, almost like a modern coffin in human shape. It didn't have any of the elegance, didn't have anything. So Egyptian society and I guess Egypt as a great power has never actually recovered from the Bronze Age collapse. Certainly it still exists, but nowhere near the same extent that it did previously. So that's the very brief overview of the Bronze Age collapse. So I guess let's where we want to talk about, I guess it's probably important to mention the sea people, who really are one of history's enduring mysteries. We don't really know who the sea people were, but what it looks as though was they were a combination of various different groups. Now, there's a lot of theories as to why these people
and they were named
banded
as well.
together. Yeah, they were, but and not all of the names. A lot of the names we don't know who they are. There's some that we can work out, namely the Peliset, who are probably the Philistines, as better known from the old ancient Bible, who
David Goliath.
who most likely originated in Crete. But even then, there's still a lot of that's a theory.
There's actually no concrete evidence of which area of the Mediterranean they came from. Yeah, there's lots of guesses, and
or even if it was the Mediterranean they originally came from, because the sea people, there's a lot of different depictions of the sea people. You know, you've got some wearing what appears to be Viking helmets. You've got some with feathered headdresses. You've got some with sort of, just bronze helmets. You've got some who are wearing what appears to be leather helmets. And the only reason we know what these people look like is from Egyptian carvings and Egyptian, what the Egyptians have left us.
Yeah.
Now, the sea people didn't just come one day and attack and wipe everyone out. The battles with the sea people seem to have happened over a period of about 20 or 30 years. And initially, the first wave of sea people were driven back. Now, there's a lot of theories as to why the sea people chose to attack, whether it was just purely for conquest, whether they'd been forced out of other regions due to calamities, natural disasters.
Yeah.
There's a million different theories. And what I'm really looking forward to in this series that we're going to do is actually digging in, looking at who some of these groups could be. I mean, we hear Peliset. I mean, we assume Philistines. But really, I think it's an educated guess. I think certainly that's Dr. Klein does lean that way.
I think they're the only ones that like are the most likely to be the Philistines, whereas the other groups of the sea peoples are pretty much guesswork.
Yeah, look, there's suggestions that they might have come from areas such as Sicily, Sardinia, and other parts of mainland Europe. It is likely that they were a coalition of different people. But what's interesting in this collapse is all these great empires are suddenly gone and nothing seemingly replaces them. We don't have the sea peoples set up there and start their own empires and start writing in different languages, anything along those lines. Really, the first thing we get is, apart from some very basic hieroglyphics and Egyptian script, is the Greeks in the time of Homer, when he's writing about things like the Iliad, the Odyssey. That's really the next sort of clue of civilization in the area, with one exception, which is where I think something that we need to dig into a little bit. The only other real written account of anything happening in that time, I believe, is probably the Old Testament of the Bible. And look, just to clarify for those out there, I'm a staunch atheist. So when I look at the Bible, I look at it purely from I guess, I can see the mythological side of it, and I can also, appreciate the historical relevance of it, because it does provide a history and a story. Now, I don't believe everything that's in that. That's just me. Dan, on the other hand, Dan runs a church, so we're coming at we'll be coming at this from completely different.
Yes.
Yeah. Ironically, Dan used to watch me preach at churches.
Indeed.
The tides have turned. That's a whole other story, and you can have a look at that one on my other channel. But I think that there is something there, and I think it's something that is worth looking at. It is worth looking at what the ancient Hebrews, Israelis were doing around that time. I actually even wonder if there's, and I say this having not deeply looked into it. I've tried to come into this as raw as I can. So when we're actually exploring this, I'm doing so from an academic lens, looking at the information and evaluating the information as we go. But one thing I would like to look at is the possibility of the Israelites being sea people. Because the Old Testament would have them coming out of Egypt kind of around that time. And certainly, Exodus talks about Egypt virtually being left in ruins with, most of their troops in the Red Sea, plagues, famine, things like that, really getting in and interfering with them. And then it talks about in the following books after Exodus, it'll talk about the conquest that they made, how they went in and they conquered all of these areas and regions.
The land of Canaan.
So why can they not be the sea people? That's something that I want to look at personally, and just see if there's anything there.
I'd be interested, because I think we disagree on this, which would make a very good discussion.
Well, even better. And look, when I actually look at a lot of the evidence and what's there, I may end up disagreeing as well. I guess this is what I'm coming into this with, an opening idea and an opening, I guess, theory. And it's very much a theory. It's not a thesis. It's not anything. It's just a pure something I know about that could match up, and it's certainly something that I do want to explore as we move on.
Exploring. Yeah, and that's what we're here for. We're here to discuss the historical side of events.
Yeah, and look, there's also the question of were the sea people, were they conquerors or were they refugees? Were they people who were forced out of their region either by conquest or by famine, by drought, by a number of different things that were forced down there and then found themselves in conflict. It does seem interesting that in such a short period of time, when you look at it relatively, they were able to collapse these major, very wealthy, very well armed, very well established civilizations. And to the point where they just left them with no trace of them existing at that period. History stops then. Stops then, which is something that definitely interests me.
Which is similar to what happened when the Roman Empire collapsed. It went in, like, the British Isles went into a dark age, and many other places too.
So, all right. So explain. I actually like the idea of your parallel there. So I guess expand on that parallel for me.
Yeah. So I guess not so much the Eastern Roman Empire, because it became Byzantium and it was still strong for another 1,000 years until the Ottomans destroyed it in 1453, I believe. But the Roman Empire was similar, but it happened over a longer period of time, where you've got all these tribes like the Goths and the Huns and all these type of other tribes that kept attacking Rome. Rome expanded too much, and again, once they overreached, all these tribes came in and just demolished them. They lost the British Isles and obviously had to retreat a lot. And that's why the Dark Ages started in. Like, if you look at the English history, there's not much history in those early days after the Romans left. There's just no writings or anything like that. So, and that's similar here with the Bronze Age. So, like, as you said, history almost stopped for 300-400 years or something, wasn't it, Chris?
Before, pretty much. I mean, to round it out, you'd say 400 years. 400 years is sort of when you start to see things again.
That starts the timing of the rising again of the Greeks, and you've got the Romans that are beginning their empire around that time, according to the myth anyway. And you've got nations having to rebuild after.
Well, I think around that time it's definitely the in Italy you've got the Etruscans at that time.
Yes,
and I think that there could be an argument, especially considering that some of these people came from Sardinia, Sicily, that the Etruscans could have been somehow involved in. I guess we'll say sea peopling. I still do like the idea of the Israelites, but I think they might have been the ones who just took advantage potentially too, and went into the land. Potentially, they went into weakened empires, weakened lands, and that was part of it. But I think there's a lot for us to dive into. So this has just been a fairly brief and quick overview and introduction of what the Bronze Age collapse was, and I guess what we're going to be exploring. So what we're going to do on the next show, which all going to plan, should be in a week's time. Ideally, I'd like to try and do these at least one a week, depending on how much research we can get in, and also life. We might even get 2 a week. You never know. I enjoy doing this way too much. So I would imagine that it's going to be something we do a little bit more of. So next episode or next week, we're going to be looking into the civilizations of the Bronze Age. So we'll look at the Mycenaeans. We'll look at at Crete, Cyprus, Assyria. Do a bit of an overview of who was who in the zoo, just so we can really kind of plant down who we're dealing with. You know, I think it's really important to emphasize how great many of these civilizations were, and how it's just so astounding, I guess, that that they collapsed in the way they did. So I think we've kind of covered what I had planned for an hour show in half an hour, which is a lesson learned for me. A lesson learned for me.
That's all right.
All that preparation, and I couldn't waffle on enough. There we go. So
all the excitement.
Look, it is all the excitement. It's this is something that me and Dan have been talking about doing for quite a while. So it's nice to be doing this. And look, usually when we're having these chats, we've sort of got our feet up and we're playing Football Manager and talking about this and everything else. But we always have some good history conversations, and I'm really looking forward to expanding and diving right into this topic.
Were the sea peoples at fault or not is the other question we want to know too.
What do you think?
I think a bit of both. I think
it was all the sea people. I think it was the sea people.
The sea people. No, I see. Yeah. I think
I'm a sea people absolutist.
I think there was probably drought and earthquakes in that area because that's on tectonic plates, but I think, like every tribe back in those times, they were all warmongering. They were all trying to take over, and if they find fertile land, they're going to try and claim it, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And I guess the Middle East back then isn't the Middle East as we know it today. No. It was a little bit more lush than it is now. Well, I mean, the Sahara used to be green, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
Wasn't green in the Bronze Age, but certainly there was the land was a lot more fertile. It wasn't as harsh as it is today in those regions. And obviously, being the Mediterranean was a very, very important trading port. So it's interesting. I think a lot of the time when we look at a world map, we look at it from a very Eurocentric perspective. You sort of look at Europe as being in the middle of everything, with Asia off to one side, the Americas off to the other, and then Africa underneath it. So it's sort of like this central hub. But in the world of the Bronze Age, well, there's no America. There's no real long distance travel. Well, certainly not on a standard or regular basis. So really, the center of the world is sort of around that region. Persia. The Silk Road, as it would become to be known, that was really the center of the world. And that's why all these great and powerful civilizations and certainly, the cultures, and beliefs of a lot of those civilizations have, kept through to today. I mean, we still know, everyone knows the story of Troy, we know who Agamemnon was. We know about the Egyptians. We know about the pyramids. These are things that our society holds in great reverence and awe. And realistically, that's because these civilizations are certainly the precursors to, Greek civilization, which then becomes Western civilization. Becomes the Romans, becomes the rest of the Europeans, and then spreads throughout the world. So it's really a different way to look at things, because even when you consider the trade of the time, I mean, there was trade going out to what is China along this Silk Road. So Afghanistan might seem like it's in the middle of nowhere, but because they had a tin mine at the time, it's like the oil in the Middle East today. I mean, you've got there's so much power and riches in the Middle East because of the access to oil. Well, tin was the oil of the Bronze Age, because it made it, it completely changed the way that people lived. And obviously, then they eventually get to the Iron Age, which takes it to another step, and then steel becomes a thing, industrial revolutions, and now we're all fighting over microchips and AI and cyberspace.
And actually,
what interesting times.
Eric Klein actually has said in a couple of videos that I've watched him that the Bronze Age collapse is a warning for any civilization as well, because it could happen just as easily to any civilization at any time. and you'd be back in the Dark Ages.
Yeah, look, it's I don't know
that extent, but because
I think one thing that people don't realize is empires come and go so often. Like we look back at even things like the British Empire. I mean, the British Empire wasn't really a major thing until maybe the 1500s. I mean, certainly there was England that, you know, it fought a few successful wars in Europe and owned parts of France, but realistically, we're talking about the British Empire really didn't start to spread its tentacles until 500 years ago, and we're going back 3,000 years, or over 3,200 years with the Bronze Age collapse. We're going back to a time that's 2,700 years before the British Empire. We're going back to a time 2,000 years before the United States of America, before Australia. We're traveling back, and there's been so many civilizations and empires that have risen and fallen. You've got the Mongols, the Romans, the British Empire, you could argue.
The Malian Empire as well in Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got all these great empires, even the Shang Empire.
They all fall eventually.
Yeah. So I guess there is the argument that, there could be a warning. I mean, look, there could be a cataclysm tomorrow that takes away all our technology and,
we won't be able to do this.
We wouldn't be. Wouldn't that be sad? But maybe in 3,000 years, there'll be some archaeologists talking about, the AI age collapse and, the evidence they found that Chris and Dan did a podcast once. And they have no idea what the hell we're talking about. Something about sea people. So you never know. All right. So what we might do is we'll wrap it up there. Thank you to everyone who is watching live with us. Thank you to everyone who is watching, I guess, in the future. Now, if you are watching live on the main Hereticals channel, please subscribe to Hereticals History. So I'm dual streaming on both Hereticals and Hereticals History. Hereticals isn't really a history channel. Hereticals History is definitely going to be set up as a history channel. I will be doing a couple of dual streams live just as we grow the channel. But what I'm hoping is people are going to find Hereticals History. They're going to fall in love with Hereticals History. Hereticals is a very different channel to Hereticals History. Hereticals is more politics, pop culture, things like that really, it's not history. If you want history, Hereticals History is where you want to be.
Channel.
Absolutely. You can also, we're also streaming on X. So you can follow us here. You can follow us on X. Follow us wherever you like. All the links are down below. Dan, what are your final thoughts before we sign off?
Oh, I guess my final thoughts is I'm very interested to delve further into what brought the sea peoples out from wherever they were, and like you said, they took down some pretty powerful nations. Like if you look at Egypt back in that time, they were the most powerful nation on earth. Oh, and the Babylonians as well. Like they're not minor empires; they're major, big hitters. Yet they all fell within 100 years of each other, as you said.
And it's interesting, but I loved that it wasn't just one group. It was a diverse group, and that's the thing. The Egyptian artwork of the time, it's some have got the feathered headdresses, some have got the horn helmets, skull caps. Some have got beards, short beards, long beards, clean-shaven faces. They've got different swords, spears, bows. They were traveling by sea, they were traveling by land. Boats, wagons, chariots. And all we've really got is theories.
The other thing as well is, there wasn't a lot of people using boats in the ocean at the time. Yes, there might have been people on the rivers and things like that, but out in the open ocean, that wasn't really a major thing yet.
Yeah, it was.
Could be wrong. I'm wrong.
In the Mediterranean, it definitely was.
I'm happy to be wrong.
Yeah. And look, it was a much more perilous journey. But most of the settlements were on the coast. So a lot of
Yeah,
places were on the coast. So not so much your Persia, obviously, or Babylon's on a completely different
but they
coast.
were on river systems.
Yeah, so I mean, look, most settlements would place themselves around rivers, but there was definitely there were definitely trading on the seas in the
True.
in the Mediterranean. Look, they weren't crossing the Atlantic, they weren't sailing down too far, but they were certainly traveling on the Mediterranean.
Happy to be corrected. And Chris,
particularly as they're getting tin out of Cornwall.
Oh, yes, that's true. What are you the most looking forward to finding out more about this age?
I'm looking forward to being proven wrong, and I'm looking forward to learning something new. Well, one of the best things I love about being a historian is I love being proven wrong. I love having a theory, and then really looking into that theory and just going, nope. And look, it's nice to be right every now and then, but when I'm right, what have I learned? When I'm wrong, I actually get to learn something, and
I like being wrong too, because that's
good.
That's good, Chris.
Well, if you like being wrong, we'll have that religious discussion another time, yeah? No, I won't go there. I'm going to be nice. Be nice. Okay. Settling it. All right, so let's wrap it up there. Dan, I think this plan is to do it probably same time or thereabouts next week.
Around the same time. Yep.
Fantastic. All right, everyone who's joined us, thank you, wherever you're watching, whenever you're watching. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever it is, wherever you are on this wonderful planet that we all get to share. Catch you all later.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Chris.